This will be video number 21 in the 6-cycle oddball series, and today we're going to make the oil reservoir for the cylinder, and that has a needle valve in it here so you can control it, and a cap. And the reason I do a cap, it doesn't show a cap in the plan, is because when you first start this engine you have to put some oil in here to get good compression and so forth, and make sure it has enough oil just when you first start it. You don't have to keep this thing full or anything. But what happens is when the engine fires, sometimes the piston comes down all the way to here, and it squirts out there and blows the oil out of the reservoir, even if the needle's partly in. So I put a cap on it just to keep from making a mess. That just screws in there like that, and that's what it looks like. And to fill it, you take both pieces off like this. Put a little oil in there and screw it in. And then you can adjust the needle valve afterwards. I leave the needle valve up when I screw it in tight. And then you can go down, and that's the needle valve is seated. Well, I'm going to start off with a piece of 1/2-inch brass. Chuck that up. What I'm going to do is do the outside feature here, which is just 2 ribs, and then drill a hole and thread it. The a 5/16 hole goes in here. Let's see. So I'm going to do the outside here. So I got to make a mark on here. I got to put a little bluing on it, just for reference. The height of this doesn't really matter, but I want it to look fairly good. I'm just going to go down 5/8 and make a little mark here for reference. And what I'm going to do is just take out some probably 30 thousandths deep in between, so it just has a little detail to it. That's all there is to that. Now I'm going to put in a cutoff tool and just mark the length of it. I'm going to try to make the two features the same width. That's going to be it right there. So they look the same, that's all I did. I will center drill this, spot drill it. I'm going to drill in here approximately a 1/2 inch. And this is 5/8 long. Just barely under 5/8 because I took a hair off of it, but I can go in a 1/2 inch. And switching over to brass drills so that it won't grab and pull itself in. Okay, now I'm going to go to a U drill, because what I'm going to do is put a 5/16 40 thread in there. A little cutting oil on that. This out of the way. I'll lock the spindle. That'll help. I don't have to go in here real deep. I only catch this about 5 or 6 threads with the cap. Now the original plan for this didn't show a cap on the top. But what I found is if you don't put a cap on it, when you first start the engine, if you have a lot of oil in there, it'll spit it out all over the engine. So I put a cap on it in a needle valve in the cap. So now I gotta part that off, but I gotta leave enough for the thread that screws into the cylinder. I'm gonna bring this out just a little bit here. Release my stop. That's what we have so far. Now for the cap, I use this piece of 5/16 with a 40 thread on it. And what I do is I make a good long thread on these because I use them quite often. So this is just extra. Now you could either use that for a mandrel, or I have a ready-made mandrel, so I can do the other end of this. I just have one that's in my drawer with all my lathe attachments. Now what I do is when I screw it on the mandrel, see what I did, I'll show you that. I screwed it on as far as I can by hand, and then I put it in and put it right up against the chuck. That way it won't turn and go in further and change your dimensions. Now I got to turn that down for a number 6 thread. I got to see what the OD of that is. The chart says 138 thousandths. Set up my stop here. Don't go beyond. So that's 255. Another 12 to go.
That should do it.
File a little nib off of here. Now I have to spot drill that, and I'm going to drill a number 60 hole through that. Now I use this with a small drill. You can just push in by hand, and it saves you breaking drills. If you try to use it with the crank or the lever, you're going to be in trouble. Just double check that, make sure I'm good for that. Yeah. I'm going to chamfer that a little bit, start the thread. So that's it for the reservoir. Now we have to make the cap. So to start off for the cap, I'm going to use this previously threaded piece of 5/16 brass. And I think there's already a hole in here from the last job. Let me check to make sure that's the right size. So that's the same drill and the same thread that I have on the bottom of it, just to make it simpler. Number 29 drill. Obviously, any of these threads you can change. I mean, most people don't have a 5/16 40 tap and die, so I just use them because they leave me a little more meat when I'm making the part. I have a little bit more stock left, because if you go in with the coarser the thread, the less stock you have left inside. Makes it weaker. So I'm tapping this to the needle valve. Now I'm just going to part off a piece to use in the cap. And the length of it, probably only about 3/8 of an inch. Probably 250 is going to be enough, a little over 250. That's all that is. It's just tapped for the needle valve, and the outside fits in the reservoir. This piece already has some knurling on it, but I got to go a little further because I go on a little blank space there and it would make it too narrow, so I'm going to just knurl it again. I'm just going to knurl the end of it. That looks pretty good. Now just for looks, I'm going to put a little clear band on here, take some of the knurling off the very bottom of it. So what I'm going to do now is counterbore that with an end mill. It already has a hole in it from previous work, and I'm just going to go in deep enough to get a good solder joint, but without going through the whole cap. So this is a blunted end mill. All I did was take the Dremel tool and just take the very cutting edge off of there and made that sort of straight there for just a tiny bit. That way it won't grab. Yeah, you see that doesn't grab. I'm putting a fair amount of pressure on that to make it go in there. Going in 50 thousandths. So that fits in there really good. I'm just going to soft solder that in there. So the next thing I got to do is I have to drill this hole through there so I can re-tap it when I finish. Now I'll finish off the outside.
This is only for aesthetics.
Now I'm going to move over and part it off. That's going to be the cap for the needle valve. I'm going to put a little flux on this. And then we're going to take it over to the tapping thing to hold it together tight while I put some solder in it. I'm just going to nip off a couple of tiny pieces of solder. And I'm going to put those in between the two parts and heat them up. I'm going to take this over to the tapping head, my tapping rig. That'll push it down in, hopefully. Threaded rod. Gotta get a piece of threaded rod to put in there because I want to hold this straight. So now instead of just a piece of rod stock, I'm going to use threaded rod to hold this straight so it goes straight in there. I'm putting a piece of asbestos under it because it won't sink the heat away from the torch. That should work nicely now. Dropped right in. That's it. So I got a little nib on here and I don't want to take it off with the sander because it'll leave streaks. So I'm just going to put this in the lathe and take that off with a tool and then polish it. So that looks good. So I got to put this in the vise to tap that hole all the way through. So what I'm going to do is put a zip tie on it so I don't screw up the knurls. There it is. There isn't much to tap there. It's just got to go through a little ways. I got the thread all the way through. So this part is a little too long, so I'm going to take some of that off. And I'm going to do that by just putting a piece of 832 screw in here. I sawed the head off the screw, so I have some 832 threaded rod. I'm going to put that in the chuck here. And I'm going to use that for the rest of to hold the needle valve eventually. So I'm just going to put this in here fairly tight. Not going to worry about ruining that part of the thread. Now I can cut this down to the size I want it. I only want about 4 or 5 threads in there. Now this is supposedly going to screw right in there, tight. So now I'm going to take the threaded part and drill a hole in there for the needle valve, for the needle itself. So what I use for needle valves in most cases is this great big, I think it's a darning needle, I'm not sure what it is, but I got them off of Amazon quite some time ago, and it's, you know, it was like $8 or $9 for 50 of them. So these needles are either chrome plated or nickel plated, I'm not sure which one, but all you have to do is sand it so you get a good coarse area here where you're going to solder it. You don't have to do the whole thing, just where it's going to be soldered to the cap that's, what do you call it? The needle valve with a little knurl nut on the top. You just take it quickly like this and that's it. I don't know if Jim can focus on this or not, but you can see it's just roughed up in that spot. I tried to focus on this, but you just can't focus on something that small. Maybe if I hold my hand like that. It's just scrape the chrome or the nickel plating off of there, so the acid will etch into the steel and it will solder. So when I drilled this was a number 60 drill. I think I mentioned that. see the needle will not go through that. So what I've got now is a number 56 drill, and the needle will pass through the 56 drill hole. So we're going to drill this out with a 56 drill. So I'm going to use this same drilling jig for that. It gives me a nice light touch. And I'm only going to drill in about this far. I don't need a lot of thread. So let me measure that. Yeah, I'll go in about a 1/4 inch. That should be enough. Now, when you drill with one of these small drills, you have to be very careful and clear it quite often, because if it jams in there, it's going to wring that drill off before you can blink an eye. Now, I could actually measure how deep that is by measuring here. I've got just exactly a 1/4 inch. Protrude this out a little bit and cut off a 1/4 inch of it. I think I'm gonna opt to cut that in the bandsaw, because there isn't enough in the chuck by the time I get that cutting tool in there. I'll just saw it off. That's a 1/4 inch. This is a piece of 3/8 brass. So I got to spot drill that, and I'm going to drill and tap that for that same thread, that 832 thread, I think it is. That was a 29 drill. I have to drill in deep enough so I start the thread on there good.
That should be plenty. So
You can see there's a little knurl left on here, but I've got to knurl it back further for the cap, because I don't want to get tangled up with my chuck here, so might have to extend that just a little bit further. So I knurled that up a little bit further. Now I'm going to part that off of there. But first I'm going to put a little reveal on either end. Not a lot, but just a little. Just take the sharp edges off of it. So there's the top for the needle valve. The trick is now to put this down, the needle down through there, and seat it, and then remove it without moving it. Because if I try to solder it that way, what'll happen is I'll get solder down in here, and it'll, you know, it won't be able to work with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure here to there, and then I'm going to take this out of there and put that in the same amount and solder it. I'm going to leave some protruding so I can go deeper. What I'm going to do is put this needle in there, and right about there I'm going to sand it some so I can solder it. I run that on the sander and get the plate. What I'm measuring here is 2 3/8 inches exactly. So I'm going to remove this so I don't get solder in it. And I've got to put it in something. I'm going to have to do it this way. And it's going to have 2 3/8 inches sticking out here, which is just about right there. Right there. And now I got to hold this in this way somehow. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it. I guess I can. Okay, so now I got to put acid on this. You running? Mm-hmm. Okay, as I showed before, this needle is steel, so you have to put tinner's acid on this, and then flux on the brass part. I just want to make sure I get a good coating of tinner's acid here so that it makes it nice and clean. And then I'm going to put a tiny bit of flux on the brass part with a toothpick and stick the needle in there. That's good. I'm going to run that needle in there, set it to the 2 3/8 inch distance, and as Jim suggested, I'm just going to lay it across this hole. Now I can solder it. And I don't have to worry about getting solder on this head because I can cut that off, and I'm going to sand the head afterwards. Let's see how this goes. I think that went in there good. We'll see. Once that cools off, I think it came all the way out the other end. It's exactly 2 3/8, so it should be right. Yep. It seats right there. It's a little close, but I should have left a little more out. Maybe I'll move that out just a hair. And I can do that quite easily. So I'm just going to reheat this and push that needle in just a tiny bit further. Okay, that's going to do it. You would think when the water hits it, it would cool it, but it doesn't. Okay, there it is. See, the needle's seated, and I've got a good 1/16 of an inch in there. So I'm going to nip this off and sand the top. There it is. It's all finished, and it seats out nicely. We're going to screw that into the cylinder and make sure it fits. That should do it. That's all the parts as far as I can think. We do have to do an ignition system for this, which I do as a Hall effect ignition. But I'm going to show you assembly and a little bit about painting and fitting all this, and then we'll start the engine and show you it running. End of number 21. Thank you very much for watching, and if you liked what you saw, please subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up. That helps us. Thank you.